Set. Average.
Yay.
If you hear screaming,
Yes,
it's just
we
my
are,
twins.
Okay, so guys, it looks like we are live. So hello and welcome to our YA Author Happy Hour. I'm just going to take a brief moment to introduce myself because I'm going to be moderating this event, and then I will turn it over to our authors to then introduce themselves, and then we can move on to some questions. How does that sound? Great? Okay. So first of all, I'll take a second to introduce myself. My name's Alex Matthew. I am actually the teen publicist at Entangled Teen. So all of you have received many emails from me, and to our viewers watching, if you've ever interacted with any of our social media accounts, that would be me behind the screen. And so now I'm going to let our authors introduce themselves. Angie, do you want to start us off?
Sure, the brand newbie here. I'm a high school teacher and currently a curriculum consultant for I mentor new teachers. I live in Ontario, Canada. It's very cold and snowy, as you would expect for Canada. And I wrote a book called Love Spells and Other Disasters. And I've got, I don't know if you can see it. It might not show up.
There it goes.
Over here.
Fabulous. We can see it.
And I'm really excited to be here with everyone today.
Thank you so much, Angie. Tracy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Tracy Wolff, and yes, absolutely. I'm Tracy Wolff, and I wrote the Craving, which is my most recent one. I was hoping my covet copies would be here today so I could show them off, but they did not come. Anyway, I wrote a vampire book.
Yes, you did.
A very wonderful vampire book. Molly, you're up.
Hi, I'm Molly Lee. I've been with Entangled for a few years now, and I've written contemporary, but now I'm switching to paranormal. I'm super excited about it. I have this book, Ember of Night, kind of, hopefully you can see it, coming out in May. It's kind of an angels and demons story, and I'm super pumped about it. So that's me.
All right, Marlene, do you want to go next?
I'm Marlene Perez. I'm the author of the upcoming, as of Tuesday, teen vampire novel, The Afterlife of the Party. See if we can get the glare out of there. And it's the first book in a teen trilogy. And well, I think Tracy's books are probably about vampires you kiss. Mine are about vampires you kill.
Awesome.
And I also have a 8-book teen series called the Dead Is series that people might know me from.
Wonderful, thank you. And last but certainly not least, we have A.K. Wilder.
Heyo. You can call me Kim. I've written Crown of Bones, which is the first in a trilogy. It's YA fantasy, so it's kind of epic fantasy. Yeah. That's what I do.
Epic fantasy is a fabulous phrase to describe that book. All right, so now I just want to say for everyone that's watching, if you guys have any questions, no matter what platform you're on, go ahead and pop them into the comments because we can see all of them, and we'll make sure to try and get to your questions as we move through the list and the kind of show that I've got planned for us today. So thank you everyone for being here, and I'm so excited. All right, first up, I've got a few general group questions that, you know, it doesn't matter what order you answer them in, but this is just to kind of get conversation rolling, all right? So my first question for all of you is if you could go to dinner with any author, living or dead, who would it be?
Madeline Engel.
Really? Tell me why.
Well, I think that's a childhood, love. I loved A Wrinkle in Time, pretty much all of her books when I was a kid. So, or, Anne Rice.
Ooh. Ooh.
Fabulous answer. I love all of those.
Would love to have with Tanith Lee, and a lot of you may not have heard of Tanith. You have. Marlene has. She is an amazing writer. She was so inspiring. Her Silver Medal Lover. Oh my God. It's just a masterpiece. And yeah, her prose are fabulous. I would love to have, raised a glass with that gal.
I've had the privilege of having dinner a few times with Kelly Armstrong, but I'm going to say I would like to go out for dinner with her again because she always gives me some great insight. And we both live in Canada, so it's a little bit easier to connect. So that would be my choice right now.
I would go with Sarah J. Maas because I'm a huge fan of hers, and I just like the closest I'd ever get to being with Rasand. So I would pick her for all of that. Totally obsessed. So I would go with her.
I would go with living. If we're gonna go living, I would go with Cory Doctorow, who I think is just one of the most brilliant YA writers, and he does some adult stuff too. Writing today, he does more sci-fi stuff, but I learned so much reading his books, and also I just have a giant brain crush on him. I just do.
Brain crush.
I like that brain crush.
Brain crush is awesome. So I know every single one of you must have a very different writing process, but I'm really, really interested to know what are some things that you take from your everyday life, like whether it be music, pop culture, the TV shows, the movies that you're watching. What are those kind of media things that you're taking in that are inspiring the way that you write?
All of the media things.
People who know me would say everything.
I was going to say the Avengers.
Right?
The Avengers, because I love Joss Whedon, and because he inspires that kind of powerhouse momentum and action over and over, that solve one thing, boom, another thing happens, solve another thing, which is so fabulous for fantasy, for any book. Just keep it rolling, keep it rolling. Plus Buffy, you know.
Yeah.
I terrorized Josh Whedon on the floor of Comic-Con once, and because I'm a super Buffy
I would
fan,
have paid to see that.
and I went up to him with my kids and my husband in tow, and I'm like, "Oh, I love Buffy," and I'm like, "You probably get so sick of hearing that," and he's like, "I never get sick of hearing that," and I just remember that, to always remember to be grateful for your fans after that one moment. I probably scared him half to death. He probably thought I was like a stalker, but it really helped me remember, to be grateful.
Oh, so true. And I've had fans write and say, "Oh, I don't want to bother you, but I loved your book," or something like that. And I go, no author in the world is ever bothered by hearing that. That is just magic. And yeah, you have to realize that connection with the reader, with the viewer. That's where the gold is.
I like to eavesdrop. Anybody else like to eavesdrop?
Yes.
I sound
Totally for it.
so I
gotta
listen to my kids or strangers.
Coffee shops, when we could go to coffee shops.
Eavesdropping. But I will tell you, my latest idea, strangely, came from a paint chip. And
Paint chip.
paint chip.
Care to elaborate?
I was doing some professional learning last week, and they were doing an icebreaker, and we had to choose paint chips that represented our mood. And there was one that just screamed to me. It wasn't even my mood. It was painted black, which I'll immediately go to no matter what. But it was called, I'm not even gonna say it. I'm not gonna say it. You'll find out later at some point. But it was a paint chip.
No spoilers here.
Story.
Tracy, Molly?
I steal from everywhere, honestly. Anybody who knows me, anybody who knows me well, my kids, my friends, family. Yeah, I'm always I don't know, there's something funny that happens and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's totally going in a book someday. Or there's just I send, my middle son is a giant, he's really ironic, but this huge jokester. And I'm constantly like, that'd make a great title. Or, so yeah, I steal from everywhere. And yeah, I love to eavesdrop too.
You kind of start keeping those filing cabinets inside your brain. You're just like, we're gonna earmark this for a later date.
Oh yeah, I think, and it started long before I was a professional writer. I remember, like, I always knew I wanted to write, but I remember I was in college and I had gone to college in Texas. I'm a California girl living in Texas now, but I had gone to school in like West Texas, and I went home with my college roommate for the weekend, and we were like, I lived in big city, California, and we were driving along, and suddenly her dad pulls the truck over. He reaches into, this is in like the 90s, reaches into the glove compartment, pulls out this gun and starts shooting into the field. And I was like, what on earth is happening? I'm like, oh my God. Again, I grew up in LA and San Diego. This is not something I was used to. And it was because he'd seen a coyote and he was like, I didn't want the coyote to think I hadn't seen him. And I was like, oh my God, that's one of them someday. I don't know what group that's going in, but that's like my first conscious memory of like holding on to a story that I knew one day I was going to do. And now I hold on to them all and they all pop up.
Totally. The same thing as Tracy says, I pull from that all the time. And I'm also like a huge Spotify freak. Like I have to have playlists for like each main character and then each scene. And I do like the scores for them. So like Spotify totally helps me if like I'm in a wall with a scene and I'll just go to the playlist and be like, oh yeah, this is the emotion I was trying to channel. So music is really huge for my process for sure.
Yeah. And so now that I know kind of how you guys gather your inspiration, I'm wondering, okay, you've got the inspiration. Now, is the next step, how do you get to know your characters? Is it different for every single one of them? Is it as simple as getting a Google Doc up and just writing out what you think their personality's like? Or is it something
I think that depends on every character. I mean, like for me, sometimes they come like full, because I write mostly first person, and sometimes they come like Grace from Crave just started talking in the back of my head one day. Like she just started talking and I'm like, okay, this makes sense. And I started to write her and it was really easy to get into her voice. Sometimes, and these are the ones I really love, is if I'm working on something and I always keep a file of other ideas, right? And like sometimes I'll like wake up and there'll just be this voice in the back of my head and I'm like, you don't fit in any of my ideas. Like I have no idea who you are. And so I start like trying to figure out like, well, what kind of story would this person be in and whatever. So I think that there's that, but I also think you just have to write them. You know what I mean? You just have to get in there and see who they are and what they would do and how they would react. I always spend forever on the first 3 chapters of a book because that's really where I learn and I refine and I kind of figure out who they are. Because otherwise, I don't know. It just takes me a little while to get to know them.
I think that the characters actually reveal themselves as you put them into situations and put them together. And I've had characters early on, like Tracy says, you starting out and I've got this idea of, okay, these two are going to be like this. And I put them in a room together or out in the field or in front of a danger and they start doing completely different things. And I go, oh, that's actually better.
Truly a mind of their own.
Yeah, you let them, I think you let them be who they are, who they want to be.
That's so interesting that they kind of already exist fully formed.
I think so.
Well, I think to some extent they do. And sometimes they do things that really, like you said, really surprise you. I remember I was writing my first YA novel and it was a trilogy and it was a mermaid trilogy, the Tempest Rising series. And I had a plan for how I wanted, like, not just the book, but the entire trilogy to go. And it involved my main character's mother. And we're about a little over half of the way through the first novel. And I'm in this, battle and all this, and I'm writing and suddenly her mother is dead. And I'm like, oh! Like, how did that happen? Like, she can't be dead. I knew her for book 2 and 3. She can't be dead, So like, I'm like, okay, computer down. And I got up and I did some laundry and I went for a walk and I picked my kids up from school. And then I came back at it like the next day and I'm like, yeah, no, she's dead. Okay. I did everything.
You kind of had to go through the stages of grief to really like work through this realization.
Yeah. So yeah, sometimes things go completely different than how you think they're going to go. And then it's just the right way. And sometimes they go completely different and it's the wrong way. So
Mm-hmm.
True.
Casey Downing on Facebook commented. She has a really great question. She said, how do you decide that YA was the genre that you wanted to write in?
I will admit I avoided it like the plague. I've been writing adult romance for a long time, and because I was in the classroom, I felt like I had teenager voice in my head all day, all the time. So I didn't really want to write teenage voice, and I honestly didn't think I could do it justice. So it wasn't until I started working in the school library and I started reading what was out there, and I realized that maybe I do want to write YA. And then I started talking to my students, and they thought I should write YA. So it was really great because I had students who were listening to me and giving me feedback and really pushing me along at the time.
That's awesome.
That's quite a, you had a real insight you in there. I like that. I had kind of a different experience because for years I wrote adult fantasy, big, scope, epic fantasy trilogies and so forth. And then I realized I had started reading more YA fantasy. And I think loving it for the pacing and the almost contemporary feel to some of the dialogue, even though you're in a fantasy world. I loved it. And then my agent said, when I submitted the Amasia series, she read through and she said, Kim, I think this is a YA. And then she said, would you like to rewrite it? And
Authors love to hear.
oh, yeah, let's rewrite this. But yeah, I'm glad I did. It's so much fun. Oh my God. I've never had more fun writing YA than the adult fantasy. Just love it.
I always say that, if you take those BuzzFeed quizzes, my age all the time comes out at 17. Like it just does. Like I'm 17, I guess. Like all my favorite movies, like most of my favorite novels, happen to be YA or new adult. And I actually started out in adult, and I still write some adult, but I don't know. I think YA is incredible because I'm super attracted to the coming of age story. Like even when I was in graduate school, that's what I wanted to do my my thesis and everything else on, right? There's something incredibly powerful and incredibly profound about getting to experience firsts with these characters, right? Not just first love, but very often first traumas, first, whatever it is. And I feel really lucky to be able to do that and to maybe help my readers in some way deal with their own. But I also feel like it's a huge responsibility, right, to shepherd your characters and your readers through some of these things. And I'm just honored to be able to do it. Honestly, I love YA so much.
I always say, high school was hell. And so I'm just naturally, that's a Buffy quote, but I'm just naturally attracted to the stories and the emotions and the wonderful, terrible things that happen in that period of time. And then I just kind of wandered into YA. I was going to write a romance novel. I had like 50 pages of a Regency because I love to read historical romances. Bridgerton fan all the way. But but that wasn't necessarily where my writing voice was. Like I'm definitely a reader fan of historical fiction. But then, so I wrote 50 pages, and then all of a sudden I went to a Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators conference and met a bunch of cool people, started going to their events. And then I heard Norma Fox Mazer talk about writing a novel by putting a fedora over her head to shut out that external editor who's telling you that's terrible, like all the negative stuff. And so I did it, and I wrote my first novel in 6 months, and that was my first published YA. So I don't know, it kind of happened. And then I love watching YA. I love, like Tracy, I love reading television about young adults and new adults. And I just think there's the possibilities are just really interesting to me as an author.
Yeah.
Molly, anything to add?
They pretty much totally covered it.
Yeah.
Just the beautifulness of YA is like your responsibility to be super authentic and yet super open to whatever's happening in the current time frame that you are writing in. And I love the possibilities, like you said. And it's just, it's what I read back when I became, had a passion for writing. So yeah, I've always loved, I read adult too, but there's something about the stakes in young adult where when you're coming into your own and you're still learning about yourself, like how you're going to react in a certain situation is completely different of how you would react if you're 30. So I love that freshness and that urgency that YA brings. So
yeah, I think I really liked what Tracy said about there's so many firsts, the first love, the first trauma. And I think there's just like that innate relatability because it's something, even though we've moved past that part in our lives, we can still remember when we were going through all those things ourselves. So it's always nice, no matter what the book's about. If it's YA, we're like, oh yeah, I can relate to that. But
the other thing about YA is that it's more generous in terms of genre crossing. I don't think you have to be as strict. Is that right, or do I imagine that?
No, I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, and I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the great thing about YA is you could just be shelved in YA, right? And your books are shelved, and my books are shelved next to contemporary or murder mystery or whatever. It doesn't matter because it's all YA. And so yeah, you get to bend a little more, and I love that too. That you get to follow the story wherever it wants to take you.
That's a perfect segue into my next question. Stacey Abrams on Facebook, she commented and said, I think all of your books have at least elements of paranormal or fantasy in them. So why do you think YA has been trending away from realistic stories and into the fantastical right now?
Because the modern world is really hard to deal with right now. Am I right?
2020 sucked.
We need an escape. We need a real escape. We don't want to deal with what's really happening right in front of us.
Well,
I was reading. Go ahead, Tracy.
I was just going to say that I think fantasy, paranormal, it allows us to experience all the emotions that we're trying to process without having to remember that's my real life. We get swept into another world and do it. And that's so much more therapeutic and, well, to me.
Yeah.
So much is a relief. But we still,
and it's a way to process, I think, what's going on in the real world too, right? Because so many, I'm looking, I haven't read everybody's book up here. I have read some of them and I'm looking forward to reading everybody's. But I feel like the ones that I have read and I know in my own, like there are certainly elements of what's going on in the real world. You know what I mean? And I think it's really hard to do it without it creeping in, and I wouldn't want to anyway. But I think that when you take it and you put it in another world, it gives you a way to process it and deal with it in a way that is less emotionally harmful, I think, than trying to, face everything that's going on in 2020 and in the beginning of 2021 even, right?
Exactly. Well, it's more gentle for sure. It's not as confronting, so we actually can deal with the emotions because we're not defensive and resisting. So yeah, everybody should read it all the time.
I agree. I was about to say sometimes the most obvious answer is, the best one.
Because it's the best. I mean, really.
Yeah.
Read paranormal.
So my next questions, I'm actually going to move into some questions that we have specifically for each of you. So Kim, I am a huge fan of Crown of Bones. And I am really, really dying to know how you tackled world building, just in general, because there's so much lore and mythology. And how do you sit there and come up with all of this stuff and then be like, now we have to condense it down and write book one?
Yeah, it is a matter of condensing down. I know way more than I ever write, but I think when an author knows information as they write the story, it filters in without feeling like a dump or you're telling or teaching them anything.
Mm-hmm.
But because you know it comes in through your words. And I always begin with a map because I'm writing fantasy, it usually begins with a map. And Crown of Bones began with me just wandering around on YouTube, running across this beautiful animation of how, how we have 7 continents now, and they're shifting. They start out as 1, and they broke up. They were 9 at one point, 7 now. And then if you follow the path that they're headed, 250 million years from now, they're all one again. And that's where Amasia came from, and that idea. And I thought, oh my God, I have to write that world, because there's been so many extinctions and our DNA has mutated so many times. And it's not going to be the super space technology. It's going to be a magical hegemony. It's going to be pre-industrial. And yeah, so I started with the map of Amasia and somehow found that's where I want to live, basing what's it like. And yeah, it's just a tremendous amount of research, really, when you start working out how a magic system is going to function, because you can make it anything, but as you all know, it has to be consistent to its own rules. You can't break your story rules, so you better know what those are. You better It's a tremendous amount of research, and then I do my best not to put any of that in the book, but just allow my knowledge as I tell the story to just filter through with conversations with the world, the environment, and you just throw yourself in it. It's I cut off from the other reality out there.
Yeah. And I think, no, continue, please.
No, well, I just blink, I just become the world, and it's very frustrating for anyone who still relates to me in any way. When I'm writing, it's just, I'm all about the story.
But that makes me think of another question, actually, for all of you, is regardless of if your book is taking place, in a contemporary time or, a made up world, you're coming up with rules regardless, whether it's for a magic system or for the paranormal creatures that exist there. So how do you go about doing that doesn't seem kind of redundant of something else that people have already read or seen before, maybe?
I actually think it's a tightrope. Because, like Marlene and I are writing vampires, and it took me a long time, right? Crave and Crush and Covet are my 65th, 66th, and 67th books before I put my toe in the vampire. I did it because it took me that long, because you're writing on the shoulders of giants, right? There are incredible vampire stories out there, whether you're talking about Stephanie Meyer or Joss Whedon or Bram Stoker or any of the many, many other stories that are out there. And I think to a certain extent, obviously you want to create a fresh world, and I always told myself I wouldn't write vampires until I had a fresh take on it. But at the same time, so much of fantasy and paranormal and lore is there's favorites, right? Like, I have my favorite things about vampires, and sure, I break some of the rules, and then others of them totally show up in the book because there are things that people expect from writing vampires or writing werewolves or writing witches or whatever it is. So I think that you have to decide what rules you want to break. It's that old Picasso thing, right? You can break every rule you want as long as you understand what the rules are and you know what they are, and you can write within them if you choose to. So you have to know what, I had to do a ton of research on gargoyles and all of that before I was willing to start breaking the rules with Grace and having her do what I wanted her to do and be who I wanted her to be. So again, I think it's that tightrope. You take what you want, and then you have a really good reason for breaking out of the lore or the ideas that are, sometimes centuries old about these creatures.
I think it's actually harder when you're writing what readers already know so much about. I think it's harder to write vampires or werewolves or witches compared to something completely new like savants and phantoms, because you've got your reader expectation. you know, way.
With vampires, there are just so many, like Tracy said, so many wonderful stories already. And I love them all. So I think one of the most important things that you can do is to really love and appreciate the genre that you're writing in, first of all. And so in the afterlife of the party, the vampires are in a band. And so, like, I felt a little stabby about a few of the things that I was reading about men in the entertainment world. And I took that out of my vampires. And it was very, very satisfying. But I just think that, like, it is hard to kind of recreate, to do something that you have. I think it's almost impossible to write a vampire story that no one has ever seen before. So you have to kind of take what you love versus what you maybe don't love and put your own kind of stamp on it, just your own little individual take on the vampire world, because you can't completely change it, because then they're not vampires anymore, and nobody will want to read about vampires who aren't vampires.
Toothless vampires.
I will say, when I was reading The Afterlife of the Party, there were some moments, without giving any spoilers, where I was just like, yes, totally got what was coming to them.
You get what you deserve sometimes.
Truly, yes. Karma's a lot quicker for some people. Angie, I really, really loved the mother-daughter relationship between Dr. Marshall and Rowan in Love Spells. And I was really, really hoping you could tell me a little bit more about how you decided to write that dynamic, and more about how the vision of Dr. Marshall came to be.
Well, at the very, very beginning, when I was still brainstorming, I wrote Dr. Marshall actually as a sex therapist. And right around that time, sex education like started blowing up, and I was like, oh, that's done. I can't do that. So then I started trying to, because I'd already envisioned what Rowan was going to be like. So I tried to figure out what a mother to Rowan would be like. And I kept thinking about like Zelda and Hilda from the original Sabrina, the Teenage Witch, the aunts, and they were quirky and they were kind, and they were practical, and that's kind of how I was envisioning Amy Marshall, that she was, a single mom who was dealing with the loss of her husband and coping in the way that she knew how to cope, and that involved paranormal investigation. So that's where she came from.
I love that. And it was really reminiscent of like a lot of other mother-daughter relationships I've either seen in real life or on TV. And so I was just like, this is so nice. I love reading about this. Molly, I would love to know like anything you can tell me a little bit more about Ember of Night. I'd love to know about the mythology, how you were writing about that, because I'm a big Angels and Demons fan. And I'm so excited.
I'm so pumped too. Yeah, I'm a huge Angels and Demons fan, and this idea actually came to me like a decade ago, and it like these characters never let me go. But I was like right on the tail end of that paranormal bubble where it was like it's not quite your time yet. So obviously we let it sit for about 10 years, and then now with this paranormal coming back, we wanted to put a new spin on it. And a lot of the inspiration came from, in college, I took a class about ancient religions. And so it was all about connecting the parallels between the creation myths and Christianity in the US and all these things. And I thought like it was so cool to see how many supernatural worlds bloom from these creation myths and these, set of rules that every religion adheres to. And one of them I found was judges, which are basically like humans who were like called on, to fight the evil in their like quadrants or in their towns. So they were humans, but they were instilled with divine powers. And I really liked that concept of, well, if they're human, they can be corrupted. And what are they going to do with this power? And especially with the world that comes alive in front of them, the angels, the demons, the bad angel, all these things that come from that one little like having a spark in a human. So that's kind of where Ember of Night originated from. And the world just kept expanding. And the main character, Draven, he just like never left me alone, like ever. He was like, when's my story going to be written? When's my story going to be written? So luckily I found, Stacey Abrams, and she was like, yeah, let's do this. And so it was awesome. And it's been really fun developing it with Liz. And then, Elizabeth did the cover, amazing. So I'm just super, super pumped about it.
And I would love to know a little bit more about the writing process for Ember of Night versus Ask Me Anything, because they're very different.
They're incredibly different. And this is one, I love contemporary, and I love writing contemporary. I love the Grad Night series, and Ask Me Anything was such a vulnerable and angry story, kind of, smashing the patriarchy. This girl just wanted to be heard, and she wanted all of her peers to be heard, regardless of what was going on. And it was a very like angsty playlist, almost like, okay, we're going to do this. With Ember of Night, there's a lot more, like I said, it's been in my head for so long that these characters are very, very, they have their hooks in me. So they're not letting me do just anything I want with them, which I kind of love, but it deals with a lot edgier content. And so it kind of takes you to a different place. It's not the contemporary line. It's very edgy. There is some dark things that happen to my main character, Harley, and going through that process and doing the research and being authentic as possible definitely did make it a harder process to write, but in the like more painful almost. Like there was times that I was crying and times I was screaming at the book, where as with Ask Me Anything, I was like high-fiving myself, with like smashing that patriarchy and that glass ceiling. But so this one's been a lot more, I guess you could say raw writing process. Very much more not as plot driven with the outlining. Like it definitely goes off book on occasion because the emotions and the characters are just flying. Whereas, with my Ask Me Anything plot, I had a very tight plot, and we just it worked out that way.
Yeah.
Ember of Night has definitely been more emotionally driven than anything. So it was definitely
Definitely. And now I have a question more generally for the rest of you guys. Is there any YA heroine that you've read either within the past few years or even recently that's just really, really inspired you, that you find yourself kind of wishing maybe you were more like?
Grace.
Grace.
Grace is awesome. I mean,
has anybody read Sadie? It's like a terrible, terrible, really dark thriller, but it's an awesome character. And maybe I don't want to be her, but I wish I would have written that character. It's a very, very dark YA, really, really dark. I think it won an Edgar, but it's amazing, but it's really, really dark content, really heavy, and kind of an unreliable narrator, which I love. Yeah, but I don't want to be her, but boy, I really love that character.
Anyone else have a character that's just stuck with them? I know for me, I would probably choose Zoya, who's a character written by Leigh Bardugo. I'd look at her and I'm just like, wow, this is like a character who's like a mirror almost. Like you read some characters and you're like, I think I relate a little bit too much.
I'm reading Ninth House right now, and I really like Alex or Galaxy in Ninth House too.
Yeah.
See, when you read so many books, it's hard to really think of just one character who sticks with you.
Yeah. I think they all have like little bits and pieces of all of them that you just want to like pull out and be like, I think I will apply this to myself. Or it causes you to think a little bit more deeply about anything that you're struggling with at the moment.
I'm really enjoying the three sisters in The Once and Future Witches. Harrow. I'm reading it right now. I haven't gotten them all the way through to the end, but I don't want to be like any of them because they're almost archetypal in how they even say in the story, the maiden, the
Crone.
mother and the
Maiden
crone.
Mother Crone.
Yes, and I can relate to aspects of all of them, but they're very extreme in their expression, and I don't know how they're going to get out of the mess that they've whipped up. So I'm not sure if I want to be there, but they're remarkable characters, and Harrow describes them and brings you into the world in a really powerful way. They're almost anti-heroes, though. They're like fascinating to watch, but keep at a distance.
Mm-hmm.
I just read that, and I love James Juniper.
Oh.
He is my favorite.
When I first met her, how about that, on the train? It's not a spoiler, on the train, and the way she described the raven feather hair, and I fell for her, and then she's just like crazy. So it was amazing. I'm glad you read that too.
If you guys could offer any piece of advice to your heroines, what would it be? Because I'm sure they need it. They're young.
Well, if the thing is if they take your advice, then you don't have a story, right?
Right. But let's say for the purpose of this, if you could just sit them down outside of their story and be like, look, I know you're struggling.
I would say to Ash, I would take her aside. She couldn't take this back into the story world. This isn't a spoiler, but I would say, open your eyes. If you suspect it, it's real. That's your intuition. Trust it.
Mm-hmm.
Trust it. If it's telling you something, if you don't feel right about something, but everybody else says, no, trust that inner voice.
That's awesome.
And I think I would tell Grace to have faith. She has these panic attacks and she has, anxiety. And I think that sometimes, you look at there's a lot of me and Grace, actually. And this is what I wish somebody had told me when I was young, right? That there are going to be bad times and there are going to be good times, and you just have to get through them, and you just have to hold on to the idea that everything somehow is going to be okay, right? I mean, I'm not saying like you don't have to work your ass off for it, right, to make it okay, and you don't, get a free ride, but have faith in yourself and have faith in the world and the people around you, and it's going to be okay. That's what I would tell her.
I think Grace would
Despite the
also
fact
really enjoy hearing that.
I would probably tell Harley to focus on self-worth as opposed to self-sacrificing. That's something with her character that she definitely has a very big issue defining her worth. She's has a very hard home life, so it's kind of been pounded out of her that, she's only good for one thing, and that's, she defines her life by keeping her baby sister safe. And so I would probably try to set her down and be like, you are worthy, you're not as alone as you feel, and that finding your self-worth is going to make you stronger for everybody else in your life anyway that you actually care about. So focusing more on that would be probably more helpful than constantly sacrificing yourself and your own ideas and your own happiness. But she's in a hard place right now, so.
Mine would be to trust your gut. Like, I think a lot of times, especially girls, are kind of told, be nice, like, get along. But I think that we should say, like for Tansy, I would tell her, trust your gut. Don't go to that party. You have a bad feeling. Listen to your bad feelings. Listen to yourself. Mm-hmm. You should trust yourself enough to listen to yourself, because you were trying to tell yourself something.
Yeah, that's really great advice. Angie?
I'd just tell Rowan, listen, this is a really bad idea. It's just a bad idea. Don't do it.
Spell work is not as cut and dry as you may think.
Although she is kind of told that by a few people. So
maybe it's, you should listen to them. They know what they're talking about.
Cut your mom some slack.
Yeah. Tracy, we have a question for you from Elizabeth on YouTube. She asked, how did you decide on the chapter titles for Craving Crush?
Actually, I have to give the idea of doing chapter titles was actually my editor's. She told me when I was almost done with Craving, she's like, I was just thinking, I think it would be kind of cool if we had these, chapter titles so that people could, remember what their favorite chapter is or this or that.
Mhm.
And I have boys, and my boys are huge Percy Jackson fans.
Yeah.
And I will never forget the day that I opened up the very first Percy Jackson book to read to my oldest son, who had read it a million times, but that was what he wanted to read that night. Actually, that's not true. He wanted to read Aragon, and I was like, I don't want to get, I thought I don't want to get sucked in. I just, have 10 minutes. Let me just, read one chapter of a book I thought I wasn't going to get sucked into. 4 hours later, I was done with Percy Jackson. But the very first title was I accidentally vaporized my pre-algebra teacher. And I was like, okay, look, how do you not fall in love with a title like that, right?
Mhm.
And I think I challenged myself in Craving Crush, and I don't always succeed by any stretch of the imagination, to come up with titles as cool as that title. That's my goal, is to have titles as cool as that. I don't get there all the time, but I I'm like, God, that's like the best thing ever.
Yeah, but those chapter titles are incredibly memorable. So I think you've done a great job. And I just wanted to cut in for those who are watching before I ask my next question. If you've got questions, please remember to put them in the chat. We are looking and we do want to answer them. So that's just a reminder. And my next question is actually for Kim. I love the Whistlebone cards, and I want to know what area of your life, if any, did you draw from to get that inspiration?
Well, divination in this way has been part of my life since I was 16. So many decades. My father was an astrologer. I learned astrology from him and then on to other teachers. So the idea of a symbol system that reflected a moment of time and maybe answered a question, whether, I have more of a psychological spin on it than the bone throwers are very fatalistic, very cut and dry. But the idea of divination was just, part of my skin. So the actual bones came from a mythology that I wrote that's not actually in the story yet. I don't know if it'll ever go in the story, of this king who had a big battle with the Sea King. And anyway, long story short, his bones then were purified and carved into whistles. And I thought, well, that music, that sound is going to, it's a vibration, it has energy. And because I've done some bone throwing myself, it just dovetailed right in.
Yeah.
Which produced the Black Robe bone throwers and the tremendous responsibility they have in the world to decide the fate of every child. So yeah, it came from my dad.
Yeah, that's a heavy burden to bear for those. So, wow. Okay. We have a great question from Curtis on Facebook. What's the best piece of advice you were given about writing when you started writing? And do you still use it today?
I think mine. Marlene,
go
you
ahead.
go.
I was just going to say, this is like probably advice everybody's heard, but I have two. Button chair, like get it down, right? Get it down first. But the second one that I always use when I'm on submission, and I think that maybe people don't realize that real writers get rejected. So rejection is kind of part of the gig, but you don't always know that. And maybe that's not such a bad thing, because if I knew then what I know now, I don't know if I would have gone through it. But it is just finding the right match. It's not anything wrong with your manuscript. It's not that you're a bad writer. It's not even anything personal. It's that you have to find not only the right editor, but the right publishing house if you're going to do traditional publishing. So it's like a two-parter. You know, the editor may love it, but then they might take it to acquisition and it might be a no-go. So I just think that rejection is part of being a professional writer, and you have to do those two things.
I agree.
I would say for me, yeah, rejection, obviously you have to learn to accept rejection. But I think that well, Nora Roberts once at conference, this was not specifically to me, this was to everybody. She told us, yeah, writing's hard, ride the hard. And I was like, yeah, like, you know, everybody has a reason why, oh, it was easier for this or it was easier for you. No, writing is hard. It's hard to write a book by yourself. It's hard to get published. It's hard to stay on top. And the advice I always give people, which I know is not really what you asked, but it's the advice that I wish somebody had given me early on, is that writing, like having a career as a professional novelist is a marathon. It is not a sprint.
Yeah.
And I've been in this business. My first book was published in 2008. I sold it at the very beginning of 2007 and came out the very end of 2008. And or 2006, 2007. I guess I'm off a year. And I think I thought, oh, it's going to be easy from here on out. You know, you're just gonna write and it's going to be great. And it has been. I mean, I've been really blessed where I've always had a contract. So I've always had something to write. I've always been with a house. But I've been with several houses, and I've been up and I've been down and I've been up and I've been down. And it was so funny because when Crave first came out, I did a book signing, a virtual book signing with Mysterious Galaxy. And when I was talking to the host behind the scenes, she had said, you know, I remember when you were here with the Tempest trilogy, which was, I think, 2010, 2011. And you're one of the few writers I've been able to, you know, 10 years later, you're here and you're doing this and you're still writing the same genre and all of these things. And I think that you have to know going in that if like I would not want, I mean, I was a teacher for a lot of years too. And I loved that career, but I would never want to be doing anything but what I'm doing. But you have to understand going in that there are going to be really great years and there are going to be years that are not so great. And you've got to get your self-worth as a writer from you and from the stories that you tell, and not from whether, you know, your books are selling. Because sometimes you write a really great book and it doesn't sell as well as you thought it was going to. And you just have to say, okay, you can quit. Or you can be like, okay, what did I do wrong? Or maybe I didn't do anything wrong. Maybe it wasn't the right time for that book. And that happens, you know? But then you have to make the decision to go on and keep writing because you still have stories to tell. So good, bad, right through it. Because do you want to do anything else?
For
Like
emerging,
I was going to say my first book, the publishing house went bankrupt. I've been through mergers. I've been through being orphaned, which means your editor leaves. I always thought, I always say, oh, I've been through everything in publishing. And then 2020 said, hold my beer.
Oh no.
My YA career was always really volatile. Same thing. I wonder if we wrote for the same house. My house
we wrote the same. We started the same time, Tracy. When you said 2006, 2007, exactly the same time.
Yeah.
We've been around.
Bankruptcy. My favorite editor in the whole world, you know, left to come to Entangled many years ago, and here I am now because I followed her because I love you guys. Yeah. You just have to. Sometimes you got to roll with the punches. Which I think is good life advice to you, actually, as 2020 is emotionally.
Yeah.
I learned two things early on from Stephen King, which I think is really great advice for emerging writers if you're starting out. So publishing is maybe further down the track, but you just would like to get your story out, first thing is read. Read in your genre, read outside your genre, read something that's absolute trash so you know what trash looks like. Read.
There's no trash.
What I think what he was trying to say was that read everything, and it's half. He would say 4 hours a day of reading, 4 hours a day of writing. But the other thing that I thought was very helpful was he said treat it like a job. Before it is a job, before you have an agent, before you have a publisher, you have your little. It may not even be an office. Maybe it's a corner in the house. And you go in there and you unplug from your social media, your phone, and you sit, like you said, butt down and write. And set yourself a goal. Maybe it's going to be 1,000 words a day. Maybe you're going to edit that scene. Maybe you're going to start a new venture. But set it up and treat it like a job way before it is one. Because otherwise it's just too ambiguous and discipline. I don't know about you guys, but to me, discipline is like 90% of it.
Yeah, for sure. My next question was going to be on those days where it feels like everything's going wrong and you just have no inspiration to write. Is it the discipline that you fall back on to keep moving forward and to keep writing? Even if it's 1,000 words of something that's going to get deleted?
Yeah, you just go for it. And there's something Joss Whedon, we're going back to him, because he's really inspiring. He said, eat the cake first. Write your favorite. If you're feeling stuck, write a favorite scene. Write what you think is going to be the easiest. Write what really excites you. And that took me a while to get. I thought, I've done chapter 6. Now the first scene over here is next. That's it. But no, he suggested you just go what's going to lift you up. Do you guys do that? Do you jump chapters when you're writing at all to be inspired?
Mine is 1K a day. 1,000 words a day is like I just say it in my little brain. 1K a day, 1K a day. And it doesn't really wait for first draft because it doesn't really matter, right? As long as you are opening up a file and you're sitting in that chair and you're even thinking about what you're going to write. It helps. And even if they're bad words, it's still the process of getting it down is helpful.
Well, you can't edit a blank page, right? So
yes.
It's best to get the words down and then you can edit the heck out of those words.
Sometimes writing what doesn't work shows you what's going to work better. And you've just got to do it that way first and go, oh, no, this way. So yeah, it's all valuable. It's no bad words. All valuable words.
And the other piece of advice I got early on was don't leave off. We tend to write until we don't know where to go next. And that's actually the worst way to write because then it's really easy not to.
Oh no.
We lost.
Oh no. Oh no.
Boom, she ran out of battery, I think.
Oh no.
I'm suggesting. I don't know. But good point. She made a good point.
Yes.
That, don't end on that. What did they say? Don't go to end on an argument. You finish that.
Sorry, I have like 5 people in my house on the broadband at the same time. I was gonna say, it's really hard if you write till you don't know where you're going anymore. It's really hard the next day to come back and sit down. You know what I mean? Because you still may not know. So one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was to write until you know exactly where you're going to be next. And then you stop there. Even if you're excited about it, it's better if you're excited about it, actually. Mm-hmm. So if you write and you stop right before like that cake scene, you stop right before it, it makes it a lot easier to come back tomorrow or later on today or whenever and get writing. Because then you know where you want to go and you want to go there, you know?
Yeah.
And also panic. Panic is also a good motivator.
Deadlines are very helpful when they're written in your contract.
Deadlines are a blessing. constraints, any constraints, like it has to be in now, it has to be this number of pages, this has to be resolved.
Right.
Those constraints, when it's a blank page and there's no constraints, that's the hard writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've hit our hour mark, you guys. This is the end. I'm so
fun.
sorry. You guys were an absolute joy to get to sit down and chat with today. Do you guys have any closing remarks for our wonderful viewers who stuck it out with us for the full hour?
I want to say thank you so much, and for everyone who's read Crown of Bronze and messaged me and just shared the love. I am so grateful. And it's never, I'll just say it again, an author never gets tired of that kind of love and support. And then engagement. It's like we're living at a time where we can actually really real time engage with our readers. And that's just pure joy. So thank you. Namaste.
Absolutely. I want to say thank you too. Like, thank you for coming today. It's always exciting to have people to talk to when you're doing a live event. And also, thank you for reading our books and for embracing our characters and bringing us into your home and into your lives and into your thoughts. It means more than I can ever say when I get mail about Grace or mail about any of my characters or or my books. It just really touches me that you come to us so open. So thank you so much for reading us.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
So much.